Greetings! Welcome to our show, Ghosts Are Near, where we discuss various aspects of the paranormal and paranormal exploration. I am your host, Keith Johnson. I'm also the founder of New England Anomalies Research. With me is my co-host and senior member of N.E.A.R, Carl Johnson.
Hello there.
Obviously, we're related as well, if you haven't guessed that so far.
It's been pointed out, yes.
Tonight, I have a very, very special guest with me, who I'm very honored to have, and a dear friend, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. She is a full-time paranormal investigator and author, the author of over 31 books, including several encyclopedias on the paranormal and paranormal definitions and research. And she received her BA from Washington, Seattle, University of Washington, and she also has received her PhD, correct?
That's correct, in spiritual science.
Spiritual science. Well, Rosemary, I'd very much like to welcome you to our show. It's such an honor to have you, it really is.
It's a real pleasure, and I appreciate being here to talk about fascinating subjects.
Yes, we're glad to have you here in New England. Do you find New England to be a very special place as far as paranormal investigation goes?
I think that there's something very spooky about New England. I do think that geophysical properties have a lot to do with our paranormal experiences, and that there is something about the landscape in New England that has been conducive to haunting and paranormal phenomena, and also helps to retain that energy.
Yes, we also have a lot of rocks here in New England.
Well, there's
You may have
something.
noticed.
There's something about certain kinds of rock that if there's a high quartz content,
Exactly.
magnetite, iron, even the presence of radon, that seems to facilitate these interdimensional experiences. And of course, the skeptic could argue that, well, it's just some sort of chemical reaction in the brain. But I think it's a mixture of energy of place with energy of consciousness, and then the imprints that have been laid down by the living things that have been here before us. I think it's a very complex mix of ingredients that gives us a paranormal experience.
Well, I'd like to ask you, how did you first get started in paranormal research? What first interested you? Did you have some kind of epiphany experience?
I didn't have a single epiphany experience like a lot of people, but rather I just sort of eased into it in childhood. Psychic dreaming runs in my family, and my mother had a lot of unusual experiences. And I was like a lot of children who are open to the unseen. You know, you have the invisible playmates. I had angels who would sing to me at night, like angels sang me to sleep at night. And I thought everybody had these experiences. Well, I think a lot of children do, and then that kind of shuts off at a certain point. But because of my mother's experiences, and also learning about her mother's experiences, the paranormal started opening up to me. I was absolutely fascinated by it. For example, my mother had a lot of precognitive dreams. They were very unpleasant dreams, as many people experience, you know, disasters or people who are going to die. But I became fascinated in dreams as a mechanism to see the future. The idea that events could make themselves known in dreams intrigued me. So I began experimenting with dreams. I got a hold of the works of Harold Sherman and started doing his exercises for developing your own ESP, including sending people messages in dreams, doing astral traveling in dreams, going to a distant place and being able to document things that could be validated later, and then also trying to see the future in dreams. That interest carried me on into adulthood. But again, it puzzled me how I could have these experiences and know they were real, and that there were other people who would try to tell me that, no, it was your imagination, this stuff isn't real, the psychic isn't real. So I'm very pleased to be working in this field today to help people understand and accept their experiences. That's really the focus of my work. I'm not trying to prove anything to skeptics. I'm not a scientist. I do pay attention to scientific research, but I'm very interested in people's personal experiences. How do they have these openings to other dimensions? What are the circumstances surrounding the experiences? How are they integrated? And what can that tell us about ourselves and about our collective consciousness in general.
Oh, that's excellent.
Now, Rosemary, I've noticed that these abilities or penchants for seeing other worlds, other realities, tends to dwindle as a person ages. At least those are the accounts I've received, and I find that true in my experience. Did that happen with you? Did the ability to see into another reality seem to recede as you got older and entered your teens, let's say?
Well, yes, Carl, I would agree with that. And this has been borne out in some of the scientific work that's been done, for example, on past life recall. That if a child is going to have spontaneous experiences, they do begin to naturally drop off at around age 8. And that seems to be an age where children become more socialized, more engaged in the outer world. And so these inner experiences, if they are not encouraged, or if someone does not have a lot of what I would call marketability, they can get very buried. Also, if a child begins talking about experiences a lot and adults are not approving of that, that can be very dampening as well. Well, for me, I was experimenting with my dreams when I was a teenager, when I was in junior high and high school. Then I got interested in the tarot. I believed in reincarnation from my earliest memories, much to the consternation of my parents. Where did this come from? So I always had a side interest going. I was always reading and studying. But it wasn't until my father died when I began to go into these areas in earnest, in a very focused, deeper study, because I had some experiences with my dad after he passed, and Raymond Moody's work became very important to me. I wanted to understand more about that, and that sort of took me back into my earlier experiences and re-energized that. Career-wise, I wanted to be a novelist. I went to journalism school, worked on newspapers and magazines, had it in my sights that I was going to write horror, mystery, and fantasy novels. Got pulled into nonfiction because of my interests and receptivity in the publishing market for that. Thought, well, I could take a little detour into nonfiction, and 31 books later, I haven't gone back to fiction.
You also write for Fate magazine, correct?
Yes, I have written for Fate since 1991, 92, around there. I'm now consulting editor, which means I'm sort of an editor at large. I write about things that I'm researching. And now I'm going to be a regular columnist for the TAPS Para magazine. I have my first article out in the current issue on curses, which will be followed by an article on what to do about curses, and then I'm going to have a column.
Well, congratulations, Rosemary.
Thank you.
In fact, we have one of your books right here, The Encyclopedia of Vampires, Werewolves, and Other Monsters. And these are true monsters, right? A lot
Well,
of them
yes,
are based on reality.
monsters that exist in our folklore, and I think our folklore stems from our own experiences. And yes, there are stories that get embroidered and take on fantastical elements, but I think that our myths, our legends, our folklore beliefs, they spring from our very real experiences.
Right.
And
Exactly.
Keith, I have to say that this was one of my favorite books to write. I've done 3 books on vampires. I find the topic fascinating. I think it has a lot to say about how we regard the dark underbelly of our beliefs and fears about ourselves, about these other realities.
How would you define a vampire, if you could just give a general, pretty much all-inclusive definition of what is a vampire, in your words?
I think, Carl, the broadest definition is an entity that takes the life force. And by entity, I'm including discarnate entities, the restless dead, and also living people. I mean, you could certainly describe a living person as an entity or a being, because there are living people who are renowned to have the ability to take something from other people. By taking the life force, that in the broadest sense is anything that makes life pleasurable as well as life itself. When you get into the folklore about real vampires, these are entities that will take your luck, your money, your love, your well-being, your health, and even your life. You can be wasted away through illness. So it's not just the blood that we associate with vampires. Vampires can take anything that makes life abundant and good.
Very parasitic, in other words.
Very
The-
parasitic,
The
yes.
term psychic vampire comes to mind.
I do-
Drawing energy, drawing vital energy from another being.
And that certainly is the life force too, because if you learn how to draw somebody's vitality off them, you're getting the benefit of that energy. They're getting depleted and you're getting re-energized. I do believe that people can learn how to do that deliberately. I also believe that there are unwitting psychic vampires. We've all been around people like that just, make us feel exhausted after an hour.
Seem to do it instinctively.
Right, exactly.
but a
And they
great
walk
deal-
away
yeah.
feeling great.
And they become telemarketers, among other things, yeah.
In definition, yeah. A lot of them do not really seem to be aware, am I correct, that they're actually draining people?
Well, some of them don't, but traditionally we have the people who, for example, cast the evil eye. They have the inborn ability. They may do it deliberately. Some of these people called witches or sorcerers, and just by looking at someone, they can take that energy. They can bring bad luck. They can cause terrible things to happen, and they walk away benefited.
Well, wouldn't that be limited to a culture where such a belief is endemic, where they've been raised to believe in an evil eye and the power of the curse through the gaze?
Well, yes, I think that we can find sort of unique characteristics to this, but if you look at other cultures throughout history and you look at folklore and mythology universally around the world, everybody has vampiric people and entities in it. Human beings have recognized that there are people as well as spirits, whether they're the restless dead or non-human entities, that prey upon the living because they want that life force.
Speaking of which, of course, we have quite a bit of extensive witchcraft lore in New England and vampiric lore as well, especially in Rhode Island. As you well know, having written about famous celebrated cases of vampirism such as Mercy Brown, alleged vampirism, Sarah Tillinghast, and Nellie Vaughan. And you and I had an experience in one of those cemeteries, didn't we?
Well, it certainly was a very unusual experience, Keith. And would you like me to just kind of recap it?
I would very much. I'd appreciate it.
Very cold, rainy day last fall, and I was about to do some EVP when I discovered that my fresh batteries were dead. And I mentioned to you I'm going to go back to my car, which was parked outside the cemetery boundaries, to get some fresh batteries. And no sooner did I turn around than there are two dogs in the entrance to the cemetery. They're not coming into the cemetery, they're just standing there. Big dog, like a big German Shepherd kind of dog, and this little dog, very odd combination. The big dog barked twice, and I was afraid that these dogs were going to come in and menace us, but they did not step inside the cemetery, and then they suddenly took off. Well, you immediately went to see where they took off to,
That's right.
and they had just vanished. They just disappeared. And then you told me about the legend of the two dogs associated with the cemetery.
And they will never enter the cemetery, it said. They will prowl around the cemetery and seemingly warn people. They will bark at people, but they won't enter it. That's why I jumped, as you mentioned, right out of the cemetery, and I looked up and down the road. They were nowhere in sight. I don't see how they could have gotten away so quickly without any noise whatsoever. So,
They certainly seem very real, but then a lot of people have experiences with phantom animals and ghosts of people where they seem very real, very solid. They don't look semi-transparent. And we often get communication sometimes or some sort of sensory input. And yet the whole experience is just weird. Well, I have to put that in the category of very weird. And as always, when it's all over, you think, oh, gee, I wish I'd had my camera then. You
right.
know?
So not definitive, but very weird, nonetheless.
Very weird, yes.
Yeah.
It's like, well, could it have been a natural explanation? Well, yes, possibly, but when you consider the legend about these two dogs, the fact they didn't come into the cemetery, they took off without a trace, I would put it in the category of one of those unexplained, strange experiences that all of us who investigate the paranormal have from time to time.
The dogs certainly showed up on cue.
They did. They did. And I would have loved to have seen where they came from. It's just like suddenly they were there.
If
Yes.
we go
And
back
they
there,
would
we'll,
not set a paw inside the cemetery.
we'll
No.
take those dogs seriously if we see them again.
Have your camera ready
Yeah,
the
have
next
a
time you
camcorder
go.
ready.
Yeah, I will have my camera ready, and they probably won't appear next time.
Probably not.
Right, because as you know, manifestations will not do so on cue.
Very
right.
capricious, it seems.
That's right, and I wish that it did, but quite often, you know, we're caught off guard. Something happens, and you haven't got the equipment handy, or it's not on, or you don't bring the camera up. But it's just one of those hazards, I think, of the paranormal, which makes everything continue to be very elusive and mysterious.
It does. That's
Sometimes
why
it
it's
just,
called paranormal.
I think it has to be an eyewitness, subjective experience. I was at the Stanley Hotel recently. I spent 8 days there and had all kinds of experiences.
Which, of course, is the hotel made famous in the novel and the movie The Shining.
That's right. In Estes Park, Colorado. Now that place is built on a lot of rocky ground that has a lot of magnetite in it. You can go down in the tunnels below the hotel and just see these outcroppings of magnetic rock. No wonder it's haunted.
It's a factor to consider. Besides, certain gemstones and certain minerals and certain rocks may act as repositories for impressions. They may have memories, so to speak.
I think that they do, Carl, and I got quite proficient at psychometry when I was working on expanding my own natural abilities. And I found that metal and stone seem to be the best, in stone I'm including quartz and crystals in that, seem to be what I would call the best recorders or memory retainers of energy that you could pick impressions.
Well, there's certainly a lot of quartz in New England, embedded throughout New England, and of course New England was initially settled by the colonists, you know, 4 centuries ago now. So,
and they brought
it's
a lot
memory.
of old world beliefs with them, and their experiences, their beliefs. I say that an expression I have is the blood and the bones in the soil. That what goes into the soil in terms of people's life experiences, beliefs, projections, mixed with the energy of place, that's what contributes to these areas that can be quite haunted. New England certainly, I think, is a very haunted part of the country. There's also the backbone of mountains, the Alleghenies and the Appalachians that goes down through part of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and into West Virginia, where there's a lot of activity as well. And for the same reason, I think.
Yes.
Exactly. In a moment, I believe we're going to be joined by Sandra, and I know she has some questions she'd very much like to ask you as well. But I want to know, what did you experience at the Stanley Hotel?
Oh, it just ran the gamut. I'm an orb skeptic, and I saw orbs that I could not explain. Not on photographs, but in real time. Going up and down the halls, we heard phantom footsteps. There were some corridors of the hotel where ghosts of children were reported running up and down the hall. I had mental impressions of imprints. There, for example, in one area in one of the outer buildings, a homeless woman had lived and she'd been chased out and had died. She didn't die outside the hotel, but she had left a very strong imprint in the hotel, and I could see her mentally. EVP, we had entities communicating with us, ghosts that seemed to be like trapped souls. There were very heavy energy presences there, shadow figures. The carriage house to the hotel had been used as a crematorium when the hotel had been used for tuberculosis victims. On the very last night, a group of us went down and did a vigil there, and we saw shadow figures. We had poltergeist knockings and bangings in response to questions. Chris Fleming, who was doing some of the spirit contact work, the mediumistic work, had tactile sensations. In fact, during the course of the 8 days, and this was a TAPS event with Jason and Grant and Darkness Radio, it seemed like there was so much stuff going on and so many people were having experiences. I thought that place was going to levitate. I mean, it was hopping.
So you would definitely say, Rosemary, that the Stanley Hotel is haunted.
It definitely is. I think there are dozens of ghosts there, and some have gotten to be more prominent or recognized than others. There are certain rooms that seem to have a high degree of activity in them. One of the rooms that I got to spend a lot of time in was 418, where I do believe that there are some trapped ghosts there, some trapped soul energies. But the room is best known for a shaking bed, that the bed will shake, not for everyone, but for certain people. And there was
Stephen King himself get scared out of that room at one time?
well, that was in 217, which is
217.
that was his room, and it's now called the Stephen King room. And yes, he got spooked himself, reportedly. In 418, there was a woman who attended one of the balls where they had to celebrate The Shining. You know, they would have shining balls there, and she felt the bed shook quite a bit, and she felt that there was something in the room that was trying to possess her and literally get into her. Her fingernail scratches are still on the headboard today.
Oh my goodness.
So what is it about that particular room or some of the other rooms that have a lot of activity in them? It's hard to say why something might collect in particular rooms. It could be events that happen there, or maybe the placement of rooms over certain areas where a lot of the geophysical energy might affect them, you know, more strongly.
We've had some experience with that, although we haven't been to the Stanley. Recently, we were doing an interview in a hotel room. I can't remember which one it was, a Fairfield or Doubletree or whatever it was. And Keith always has his recorder going, and sure enough, when we replayed the audio and we got back, there was an EVP on that. I know the last time that we went to the Penn State, some of our crew came along and they stayed in a Motel 6 and they were recording for EVPs there, and they actually even heard one while it was happening. So I don't know what it is about hotels and motels, these sorts of things.
So many people are passing
passing
through.
through
And,
Passing through,
same is
and
true of spirits. So.
a lot of intense energy in hotels. I've collected a number of cases where people feel that they've been visited at night in hotels. And I don't think that somebody necessarily has to die in a hotel room in order for imprint energy to take hold. In fact, I do think that, because, hey, we know a lot of sex goes on in motels and hotels, and that sexual energy is a very prominent part of psychic currents and the paranormal.
Oh, sure.
And that itself can imbue field consciousness with an energy that might make some sort of phenomena easier to manifest. I think there's a very strong connection there.
Certainly, that's one theory to explain it. I've never really given it much thought, but yeah, it's very interesting.
That's been another avenue of my research in the past couple of years, along with shadow people, is looking at the sexual component to paranormal experience and sexual encounters with ghosts. I mean, people have them.
Right.
Most people don't
Right.
talk about them because it sounds just too way out. But they do go on, and I think that hotels where you would have a lot of people coming and engaging in high-pitch, high emotional and physically intense energy, that's going to contribute to the
It
haunting
does make
phenomena.
sense.
And then, of course, you have always the stories of violent arguments and
Oh yeah, right.
you know, the murders and suicides and you know, natural deaths too in places like that, just because you have such a wide cross population of people, you know, in and out all the time. You're inevitably going to have some of that.
Right.
Well, we're almost out of time, believe it or not.
It
but
goes too fast,
I know
Keith.
it does. I know Sandra had a question.
Well, yeah, we're actually down on crew, so that's why Carl and I have had to switch off on the cameras here. But I did want to come in and sit down and just, you know, ask a couple of questions that I have written down here. I wanted to know if you could briefly touch on the role of women in the paranormal today, how you might think their role is unique or not.
I think that there are a lot of women doing very good work, and many of them are below the radar. They haven't either sought attention or they haven't been recognized for their work. But
I think that's changing.
it is changing, and I'm very glad to see it, and I'm right out there championing it myself. I think that women do deserve to be recognized for their work. A lot of times we'll take a back seat, but women tend to be more empathic, more sensitive, more tuned into emotional atmospheres. Now, the interesting thing is that there has been scientific research done of psychic ability and accuracy rates, and people working alone don't get as good a hit rate as men and women working together. So I think when you join feminine consciousness with a masculine consciousness in paranormal investigation, you're really getting the best of both worlds. Women are going to bring a different sensitivity to what they're experiencing than men, and that's very important in how we understand how phenomena manifest.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. I appreciate that, and that's a wonderful answer. And when we have you on again, you must come back again.
I would love to,
definitely have
Keith.
to have
Thank
on
you.
again.
Yes, there are so many questions
I
written
know.
down here.
I want to devote a whole show to shadow people next time. Next time we'll get into that.
Excellent. Fascinating topic.
It is. Fascinating. It's been reported more and more. And I'd like to, again, thank you so much for being our very, very special guest and for being such a wonderful friend and bringing so much to this field.
We have really been looking forward to this.
Me
I have to
too.
say.
Absolutely.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Sandra, would you like to say a little bit about our contact info?
Sure. As always, we'd like you to know that we at New England Anomalies Research are available to research alleged hauntings or assist those of you who may be experiencing unexplained phenomena in your home or place of business. We'd also like to hear from you if you have a show suggestion or would like to be a guest on Ghosts Are Near. So give us a shout at ghostsarnear@inbox.com, and we'll believe you.
God bless you, Rosemary.
Thank you very much, Keith.
It's been
Sandra.
my pleasure, and we look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great.
I think this has been a fascinating show, and we were so very glad to have Rosemary with us tonight. And I'd like you all to stay safe and be careful, become as much informed about the paranormal as possible. And any closing remarks, Rosemary, did you like to say to us? To anybody who's starting in the field, maybe new to it?
I think it's important to pay attention to unusual experiences and also to write them down, get them documented, because we do forget details. Our subjective experiences are very important in terms of how we understand how the paranormal works.
Very well said. Very well said. And I'd like to say hi to Bert Silverberg, my old friend and director who I ran into in the hallway, and we go back a long ways. So again, until next time, goodbye, friends.
Good night.